Good morning, and thank you for coming today. I am Christopher Hart, Acting Chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board. I'm joined by 3 senators who have been long-standing champions of transportation safety. Senators Charles Schumer, New York, Richard Blumenthal, and Chris Murphy of Connecticut. Thank you, Senators, for joining me. The National Transportation Safety Board is the federal agency that investigates transportation accidents, determines why they happened, and makes recommendations to prevent them from happening again. Today, the NTSB is releasing reports on our investigations of 5 accidents on Metro North Railroad that happened in less than a year. Taken together, these 5 accidents resulted in the deaths of 4 passengers and 2 Metro North workers, in addition to 126 injuries, some of which were very serious. On behalf of the NTSB, I would like to express our deepest condolences to those who lost loved ones and give our best wishes for the fullest possible recovery to those who were injured. Today's investigation reports are part of our process to prevent similar tragedies from happening in the future. To date, we have made 5 recommendations to Metro North and 1 to the Federal Railroad Administration. On November 19th in Washington, D.C., the NTSB will consider a special investigation report about the systemic common causes in these 5 accidents. At that time, we will consider additional safety recommendations to address those systemic causes in order to help prevent future mishaps. 2 accidents on one railroad in a short period of time may be a coincidence. 5 accidents in one railroad in less than a year beg the question, how important was safety at Metro North? Our investigators found safety gaps in both Metro North and the regulatory environment in which it operates. Regulators must insist that safety is not just a box to be checked, but a way of doing business every single day. Otherwise, we can anticipate that operators will continue to make the same mistakes that we saw in these accidents. Time and again in these investigations, we saw regulatory and oversight lapses that the NTSB had warned about before. Safeguards that could have prevented harm if they had been implemented, but they never were implemented. The role of the regulator is to mandate changes to improve safety nationwide. Absent such changes, even if Metro North becomes a paragon of safety, the regulatory and oversight concerns that we identified in these 5 accidents will predictably result in accidents elsewhere. Let me summarize the 5 accidents. The first accident on May 17, 2013, started with a derailment in Bridgeport, Connecticut. The train that derailed was subsequently struck by another train, injuring at least 65 people. We found that the cause of the derailment was a broken pair of joint bars on a track in the Metro North New Haven subdivision. Contributing to the accident were, first, the lack of a comprehensive program for scheduling corrective maintenance. Second, the regulatory exemption that allows less comprehensive track inspections for high-density commuter railroads. And third, Metro North's decision to defer scheduled track maintenance. To clarify the regulatory exemption, in most cases, each track has to be inspected on foot or traversed with a vehicle. But high-density commuter railroads, just like the ones that operate many of the trains arriving and departing beneath us here at Grand Central, are exempt from that requirement. Instead, the inspections may be done visually from a vehicle running over adjacent tracks. The NTSB expressed concern to the FRA about this exemption long before the accident in Bridgeport. After the accident, we recommended again to the FRA that it remove this exemption. We also recommended to Metro North that it inspect its tracks as carefully as if there were no such exemption. I'm pleased to note that Metro North responded that it has done exactly that. We are awaiting a response from the Federal Railroad Administration about removing that exemption nationally. High-density commuter railroads should not be exempt from these more stringent rail inspection standards. The second accident occurred only 11 days later, on May 28, 2013, when a track foreman was struck and fatally injured by a Metro-North train in West Haven, Connecticut. We found that this accident was caused by a rail traffic controller's removal of the protection that was in place to ensure that no trains would travel on the track segment while it was occupied by the track foreman. In addition, there was no redundant backup feature to provide protection if the first protection failed. Contributing to the accident was the FRA's failure to require such redundant signal protection as the NTSB recommended 6 years ago. After the accident, the NTSB made an urgent recommendation that Metro-North provide such redundant signal protection for its workers, and again, we are pleased to note that Metro-North has taken action on this recommendation. The NTSB also reiterated our 6-year-old recommendation to the Federal Railroad Administration, urging that all railroads be required to provide such redundant protection for track workers. The third accident was the derailment of a CSX train in the Bronx on July 18, 2013. Fortunately, there were no injuries or fatalities. This accident is among the 5 that I am discussing today because it occurred on Metro-North tracks. Our investigators found that this accident was caused by Metro-North's decision to defer scheduled track maintenance. A combination of factors led to an increase in the distance between the 2 rails, which in turn caused the train's wheels to leave the tracks. Metro-North hired a contractor to evaluate its track maintenance program after the first accident of these 5, the Bridgeport accident, and that contractor found that the site of this derailment in the Bronx was one of 654 locations with poor drainage. In addition, Metro-North's program for replacing ties and for surfacing track was 7 years behind schedule. Early this year, the contractor completed its evaluation and recommended improvements to Metro-North's track maintenance program. Metro-North responded by providing an action plan. Maintenance and other ongoing efforts to address known safety issues should not have to wait for accidents in order to be implemented, but should instead be preventive measures and be completed before an accident occurs, not just for Metro-North, but for all railroads. The fourth accident was the derailment on December 1, 2013, of a Metro-North train in the Bronx. On that Sunday morning, as people were headed into the city, their commuter train derailed, 4 passengers died, and at least 61 were injured, some seriously. Again, our condolences to the loved ones of those who were lost, and our hopes for a full recovery for those who were injured. The train was traveling at 82 miles an hour when it reached a curve that had a speed limit of 30 miles an hour. The locomotive and every car of the train derailed. Many cars slid on their sides, and most of their ground-facing windows detached. All 4 people who died were completely or partially ejected from the train through window openings. We determined that the cause of this tragic accident was the engineer's non-compliance with the 30-mile-per-hour speed restriction because he had fallen asleep due to undiagnosed severe obstructive sleep apnea. His sleep disorder was exacerbated by his recent change of work shifts from a late afternoon evening shift to a morning early afternoon shift. Contributing to the accident was the absence of a Metro-North policy or a federal regulation requiring medical screening for sleep disorders. Also contributing to the accident was the absence of positive train control, or PTC. All of these deaths and injuries were preventable. PTC would have prevented this derailment by automatically applying the brakes even when the engineer did not. For decades, the NTSB has repeatedly called for the implementation of PTC. Thankfully, Congress has mandated the use of this technology by the end of next year. Thank you, Congress. Beyond this technological measure, screening safety-critical personnel for sleep disorders, such as obstructive sleep apnea, or OSA, might also have prevented this derailment. The engineer had complained about fatigue prior to the derailment, and additionally, he had several risk factors for OSA, but neither his personal medical providers nor his occupational health evaluations at Metro-North had identified the disorder. After the accident, he underwent a sleep study that resulted in a diagnosis of severe obstructive sleep apnea. OSA is usually treatable, and we have success stories in industry of the win-win that can occur when OSA is diagnosed and treated. The Metro-North protocols and FRA regulations still in place today require vision and hearing testing every 3 years for safety-sensitive personnel, but there is no requirement whatsoever to screen for sleep disorders. This December, Metro-North plans to begin screening engineers for sleep disorders. And we're very pleased that Metro-North will be taking this step, but we have recommended that the FRA make this a national requirement, including screening for obstructive sleep apnea. The NTSB recommended that the FRA require screening for OSA 12 years ago. 12 years ago. And to date, no regulation has come out. The fifth and final accident I will talk about this morning occurred on March 10th of this year when a Metro-North electrical worker was hit by a Metro-North train in Manhattan. We found that the cause of this accident was incomplete and inaccurate roadway worker job briefings, which resulted in a miscommunication regarding which tracks were closed to enable the repair work. Contributing to the accident was the use of a reference point for determining which tracks were closed that was poorly understood by some of the workers on the track. As a result, some of the Metro-North employees thought that they had protection from train traffic throughout an area that was larger than where the protection actually existed. When an approaching train sounded its whistle, 2 of the workers jumped clear of the track, but the third was struck by the train and killed. The day after the accident, Metro-North instituted a safety stand-down for more than 340 employees to reinforce the importance of complete and accurate daily job briefings. Metro-North also banned the use of signal department jargon to describe track closure limits to help eliminate confusion amongst the employees who did not understand that jargon. Last month, we made recommendations to the Federal Railroad Administration and others on roadway worker protection rules and requirements for job briefings, because job briefings must be comprehensive and effective, and they must be meaningful to the workers who receive them. These probable cause determinations that I've discussed today resulted from exhaustive and thorough investigations. But regulators and others must act on our recommendations in order to save lives and prevent injuries in the future. When you ride on a passenger train, you have the right to demand that your safety comes first. If you work on the railroad, you have the right to demand that job safety comes first. When you travel on these commuter trains, you have the right to know that everything possible is being done to help ensure that you arrive safely. Previous NTSB recommendations that have not yet been acted upon might have prevented one or more of these accidents. This is especially tragic. But if implemented, they can still save lives. The same is true of the new recommendations that we made during these investigations and of any further recommendations that we may adopt in the future. We are very pleased that Metro-North is taking steps towards safer operations. We hope they will continue to do so. We also hope that the FRA will require changes so that safety will come first for railroads across the entire nation. Otherwise, railroads will make the same errors that we found in these accidents, and we can anticipate similar tragic results. All of us who ride on the rails, as I did to come here today, and every person who works on the rails has the right to expect better. Thank you again for coming today. I will answer any questions for the NTSB after the senators have commented. We will start with Senator Schumer. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Barry.
Thank you.
Well, first, let me thank Chairman Hart and the NTSB. They are a great agency. They are our premier safety agency when it comes to transportation. And because they focus on safety alone, they are the guardians of safety and don't get pushed around by other special interests. And when they come out with a report, it's the gold standard. It's the gold standard. So we very much appreciate you and your staff's hard work. I want to thank my colleagues, Senators Blumenthal and Murphy. They have been champions of rail safety from before the time these accidents occurred. They are great colleagues. They sit on influential committees that will deal with this issue, and I look forward in partnership with them getting many of the recommendations, particularly in regard to the FRA, that Chairman Hart made to be implemented. And one final point, again, my thoughts go to those families who lost loved ones, unfortunately unnecessarily, as the report shows, and to those who are still recuperating. May they have a speedy recovery. Well, as Chairman Hart just discussed, over the past year, there have been 5 Metro-North accidents. We all remember in December, a Metro-North train derailed near Spuyten Duyvil, tragically killing 4 passengers, injuring 67. We know the train was traveling over 80 miles an hour in a 30-mile-an-hour zone, and the train engineer admitted to nodding off. Turns out he had sleep apnea. And the other injuries, accidents in Fairfield, Connecticut, in the Bronx, in Westchester, again, have been documented well by the NTSB. Overall, the 5 most recent accidents resulted in 6 fatalities, 126 injuries, $28 million in damages. The tragedies demonstrated a total lack of emphasis on safety, failing to keep up with track maintenance, a limited focus on crew training and communication, and practically ignoring existing NTSB recommendations. The NTSB report represents a horror house of negligence, resulting in injury, mayhem, and even death. It seems clear from the NTSB report that had Metro-North been doing what it was supposed to be doing, then every one of these accidents could have been avoided. The emphasis was on time, without regard to safety. Clearly, in Metro-North, the culture of safety was lacking, completely lacking. The report has almost an Alice in Wonderland-like quality. Students in training, operating trains without supervision, allowing trains onto tracks where they shouldn't, killing unprotected fellow workers, allowing an engineer who had sleep apnea to drive a train with thousands of lives in his hands, ignoring mandated track maintenance over and over and over again. We know that Metro-North didn't do this deliberately, but it almost seems like they did. To read the report is scary. It's almost like a sci-fi movie when some unknown force took control of Metro-North and deliberately prevented it from doing the right and safe thing time after time after time. Now that we've seen the NTSB's report on these 5 Metro-North accidents and their probable causes, it is clear we can and must take lessons from these accidents and make real changes to the culture of safety on Metro-North, as well as the entire New York State, Connecticut Regional, and Amtrak lines. The NTSB accident briefs released today mark an important step in the process to improve the safety of the system. We look forward to the NTSB's final report, called the Special Investigation Report, with official recommendations in about 1 month. At that time, those of us standing here will implore Metro-North and the Federal Railroad Administration to turn these recommendations into actions and rules and do it quickly. But even before that official document, the lessons for the Metro-North and the FRA are obvious. MTSB has made many recommendations to FRA and MTA over the last years and decade. And once again, many of these same issues are unfortunately back on the table. For instance, prior to these accidents, the NTSB recommended the FRA created a rule requiring a sleep apnea test. In fact, the issue of sleep apnea has been raised by the NTSB for over a decade. However, despite continued calls for action on the issue, the MTA did not implement sleep apnea testing across their entire system. Instead, only certain engineers and drivers working on buses and the subway were tested for disorders. The sleep apnea test was not put in place for conductors on the LIRR or the Metro North. This makes no sense. We must treat our rail system in the Northeast as a comprehensive system. We shouldn't pick and choose which transit line should implement each recommendation. Instead, when we take action, it should be for the entire MTA system, as well as for Amtrak and other commuter and passenger rail services. The FRA should consider implementing these much-needed recommendations on all commuter and passenger lines. Second, these accident briefs shed light on a number of failings, both with the culture within the Metro North, which seem to prioritize on-time service over safety. These should not be mutually exclusive goals. Unfortunately, we continue to learn discouraging facts, like that Metro North routinely delayed critical maintenance or inspections in an effort to achieve on-time performance. That should not happen again. Simply put, Metro North deferred maintenance and prioritized on-time performance, and we can't allow that to continue. And I'm confident the NTSB's recommendations will change all that. Any transportation system, rail, airplane, automobile, watercraft, must put safety of passengers above all else. What these reports also begin to shed light on is the failings went beyond Metro North. It is clear that in some cases the FRA, tasked with overseeing our rail system in this country, should also have been doing more. In the coming weeks, as NTSB issues its final recommendations, I not only urge the MTA to implement the changes recommended, but the FRA to do the same. It should not have taken five accidents and a number of fatalities to kickstart these changes. Let us hope the NTSB report is taken seriously. The recommendations must be the rules of the road, not simply suggestions. Now, there is some good news here. The MTA and Metro North, it seems, have taken the report to heart. They have made some changes already, and we give them credit. In fact, they just announced they will be hiring a top person at the NTSB to serve as its chief first safety officer. When the MTA and Metro North have a chief safety officer, the issue of safety will be elevated, not kicked under the rug. They've also agreed to install inward and outward facing cameras. They've initiated improvements to track repair and inspection programs and hired a private contractor for audit and worked with the FRA on their deep dive report. So while they certainly have taken steps, while Metro North and the MTA have certainly taken steps to move forward, we have to monitor them carefully. We should not take our eye off the ball. As the NTSB finalizes its review and releases additional recommendations, Metro North and the FRA must be equally diligent in implementing those additional recommendations to ensure that tragedies like this never happen again. And with that, it is my pleasure to turn the podium over to my dear friend and colleague and neighbor, Senator Richard Blumenthal, who has been just a clarion voice on this issue.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to Senator Schumer for his leadership over many years on this issue of rail safety and transportation. And thank you to the NTSB for this very powerful and compelling report. These reports, and there's more than one, they are separate reports, but this report is really a call to action. 6 people died senselessly and needlessly. The MTA has blood on its hands, but the blame belongs to the Federal Oversight Agency as well. The Federal Railway Administration has simply failed to do its job, and it has to be held accountable for the NTSB recommendations that it failed to implement and the law that it failed to apply and enforce. That is its job. And as much as the MTA is to blame, the Federal Railway Administration shares that blame as well. This report presents in new depth and detail a story of a railroad safety culture in disarray, essential equipment in disrepair, and that federal oversight agency in a sleep-like daze. There were 5 recommendations on fatigue, 2 on cameras facing inward and outward, all unimplemented and unenforced by the Federal Railway Administration. The simple, plain, painful, and shameful fact is that Robert Luden would probably be alive today if the Federal Railway Administration were doing its job. The shunting system that it recommended, or a redundant signal system that would have saved his life, was unenforced and unimplemented by the Federal Railway Administration. There are now 63 recommendations from the NTSB that have not been enforced by the Federal Railway Administration. That is unacceptable. And there will be more deaths and injuries and dollar costs around the country if the FRA continues to fail to do its job. Robert Luden was a 27-year employee of the Metro North. And he was working on the tracks at a time when no train should have been allowed there. The trainee, the rail traffic controller, in effect, failed to do his job, but there was a requirement for a backup system to protect workers, and that system was never implemented, even though there was a previous close call, even before that accident, just a few weeks before on May 6th. So the story is one of repeated warning signs and missed inspections that were disregarded. In Bridgeport, the tracks were separated at the point of derailment by 0.3 of an inch, way beyond what's permitted under the regulations. The crack joint that was responsible for the derailment was actually visible, clearly visible, but maintenance was not done. That derailment occurred because that site was an accident waiting to happen. So there is more than enough blame to go around, and the question is, what do we do now? Well, Senator Schumer and I introduced legislation just a couple of months ago, the Rail Transportation Safety Act, joined by Senators Murphy and Senator Gillibrand, that will require a higher standard. It will require the kind of shunting system that would have saved Robert Luden's life. It will require the kind of cameras and alerter system that would have prevented the accident at Spuyten Duyvil. It would require automatic signal control that would have slowed that train going 82 miles an hour in a 30-mile-hour zone. If the Federal Railway Administration won't do its job, this legislation will compel these measures and many others that will advance the cause of rail safety. What has to be done here by Metro North is clearly and unequivocally to put safety first. More important than on-time performance, more important than the convenience of other special interests, safety first. This report is indeed a call to action, and Washington must set aside its gridlock and partisan paralysis. There is nothing partisan about rail safety. There is nothing political about saving lives, preventing injuries, and making sure that taxpayer dollars are well spent. As the chairman of the Surface Transportation Subcommittee of the Commerce Committee, the subcommittee that has direct jurisdiction over these issues, I can tell you I'm going to be fighting for new legislation and for proper performance by the Federal Railway Administration. That kind of performance should not be a matter of discretion or convenience. It ought to be required. And ultimately, the Secretary of Transportation and the President of the United States ought to come down hard on the Federal Railway Administration to make sure it's doing its job. This responsibility is shared. Let me just say finally, not only Robert Luden, but the 4 passengers riding that railway on December 1 of last year would probably be alive today if simple, straightforward measures were taken to preserve safety. They are not expensive. They don't cost a lot. Cameras, alerters, automatic signal control, these are more than affordable by MTA. The failure to implement them is unconscionable. MTA is now moving in the right direction. It's on the right track, but there is a lot of work still to be done. The appointment of a chief safety officer is another good step. But there is more to be done before the MTA or Metro North can say it is doing its job. There's more to be done by the Federal Railway Administration to make sure it is doing its job. These accidents and crashes and cascading catastrophes are preventable and avoidable. To allow them to happen is unacceptable. I'm very pleased to introduce my great colleague from Connecticut who has been focused on this issue along with me, Senator Chris Murphy.
Thank you very much, Senator Blumenthal. Thank you to Senator Blumenthal and Senator Schumer, who have been great leaders on this issue from the very beginning of this crisis. They have been on top of NTSB, on top of FRA. Thank you very much, Chairman Hart, for this comprehensive report. Every day, tens of thousands of Connecticut residents get on Metro North to travel to work here in New York City, and then at the end of the day they do the same to return back home. And there are a lot of things that are on the minds of those men and women as they're heading to work. They're thinking about all of the different projects they need to take on that day. What are the first few phone calls that they need to make when they're heading home? They're thinking about the homework they need to help their child with, the lawn that needs to be mowed before the sun goes down. The last thing that should be on the mind of a commuter on Metro North is whether they are going to survive the commute or not. And the fact is that there have been too many people since these accidents began who worry as they board the train whether or not they are going to reach their destination safely. And the same thing goes for workers. Workers have a lot on their minds as they seek to keep this railroad in a state of good repair. Of all of the things that workers for MTA need to worry about, one of them should not be whether or not a train is going to collide with you as you are doing your job. This report, as Senator Blumenthal very clearly stated, is a call to action for a host of individuals and entities that are responsible for rail safety. And I will say that we have seen where investments in rail safety save lives. This isn't theoretical, this is practical. Senator Blumenthal and I, the day after the derailment in Bridgeport, walked the mechanical carnage of that site. And we thank God that there were M8s on the rails that day. Those new cars with significant structural improvements over the older cars on the rail saved lives that day. The decision to invest money in new safe rail cars meant that people survived that incident that wouldn't have otherwise. Investments in safety aren't theoretical, they're practical, they are real. And it's time that the FRA woke up to that notion. The FRA hasn't adopted dozens of recommendations from the NTSB because they seem more interested in facilitating the cutting of corners by railways than investing in saving lives. I'll just highlight one example that the chairman mentioned. There is an unbelievable exemption for regular inspections of tracks for high-traffic commuter railways. That is completely counterintuitive. The high-trafficked commuter railways should have more frequent inspections, not less frequent inspections. Yes, it costs a little bit more money in order to do regular inspections on a high-traffic rail line. Yes, it's a little less convenient to get people out to the tracks when there are dozens of trains running along it on an hourly basis. But we should expect more inspections, a greater and tougher safety regime on the most heavily trafficked rail lines like Metro North. The law requires exactly the opposite. So it's time for Metro North, it's time for the FRA to wake up. But here's the last comment that I'll make. Safety doesn't come for free. Several of the incidents that are referenced in the reports today talk about deferred maintenance. This is maintenance that Metro North knew they had to do, but didn't. And so the responsibility clearly lies with FRA to proffer the recommendations and regulations that are recommended by the NTSB. I can't say it any better than Senator Blumenthal and Senator Schumer that the culture of safety has to return to Metro North. There is no choice to be made between on-time performance and safety. Those are not mutually exclusive. Safety comes first, but you can have both. But safety doesn't happen without an investment in it. And so Congress has to be a partner as well. Congress has to step up and make the investments in the Northeast Corridor so that there is no excuse for deferred maintenance. We have an old rail line, bridges that are 100 years old in parts of Connecticut. And so if we really want to make a full-fledged, multi-partner commitment to rail safety, then Metro North needs to inculcate a culture of safety. FRA needs to start putting new regulations on the books, and Congress needs to appropriate sufficient money in order to make long overdue repairs along the line. Everyone has responsibility moving forward. And as we sit here today and tell Metro North and FRA to shape up, then we need to be willing to go back and make sure that they have every dollar necessary to do that. I'm glad that we are making progress. The new leadership at Metro North has clearly shown a renewed commitment to safety, and those thousands of men and women who are getting on the rail line every day are doing it with more confidence. I can tell you that by virtue of hundreds of conversations with people in Greenwich and Stamford and Bridgeport and Fairfield. There is new confidence in this new leadership at MTA, but there is no more confidence in FRA until they step up to the plate and do the very same things that our local leadership is doing at the request and recommendation of the NTSB. Let me turn the podium back to Acting Chairman Hart for your questions.
Thank you, Senators, for those very illuminating and inspiring remarks. Now I will open the floor to questions. Yes, please.
Going forward from this point on, Metro North community safe or Metro North workers safe?
The question is, going forth from this time, are Metro North commuters safe and are Metro North workers safe? Our job at the NTSB is to investigate accidents. We do not do a general safety audit of the entities that we investigate, but the reason we are doing a special report in about a month is because we saw some systemic factors that we feel need to be addressed, and we intend to pursue that.
Have the systemic factors been changed sufficiently?
I need to take a question from someone else. Yes, please.
What are the forces at work that prevent the FRA from implementing your recommendations?
The question is, what are the forces at work that prevent the FRA from implementing the recommendations? And after I give my initial pitch, I'll turn to the senators and see if they have any thoughts on it. We appreciate as an accident investigator that the regulatory process can be slow and cumbersome. Why it would take 12 years to implement a recommendation about screening for sleep apnea, we don't have a good answer for that. So I'll have to turn this one over at this point to the senators and see if they have any thoughts on that.
Okay, well, first, in answer to Tiwa's question, clearly people who go on Metro North are safer today than they were a year ago. Clearly, the workers are safer today than they were a year ago, but we still have progress to make. With safety, 95%, 98%, 99% isn't enough. We have to really work to achieve 100%. So would I travel on Metro North? Absolutely. Would I also push them to be safer still? Absolutely. In reference to the FRA, the beauty of the NTSB is a totally isolated agency whose only goal is safety. The FRA has to work with all the railroads. And unfortunately, there's a push and pull there, and the railroads say, well, we can't do this, it'll cost us too much money, or we can't do that, and we have other things that are higher priority, etc. And the beauty of the NTSB is that they push on safety, which has to be the highest priority. So what the FRA has to do is what Metro North is in the process of doing, make sure that a culture of safety permeates its decision-making, just as it should on the commuter rails. Are we there yet? No. Have they received a wake-up call because of what's happened here? Yes. And we're going to have to push them.
Let me give a little bit more detail. On the issue of safety, I think we should give MTA its due. The inspections that Senator Murphy referred to are being done more frequently. Even though it's a commuter line, they are doing more of those inspections and doing them on the tracks as opposed to at a higher level on a car that goes on the tracks. They've implemented automatic signal control at points like Spuyten and Duyvil where there are dramatic curves in the road. They have taken a number of other steps, not yet the cameras facing inward and outward, not yet positive train control, not yet some of the other measures that ought to be taken, but they have done a system, in effect, a second check system protecting workers on the tracks. So there are definitely steps that have been taken in the right direction. Passengers and workers and freight transporters are safer today, much safer than they were just a year ago. But there is a lot more work to be done, and passengers deserve better. On the issue of FRA, I'll be very blunt. They are much too captive to the industry they're supposed to regulate. They are much too deferential to the rail owners as opposed to the freight transporters and the passengers and commuters who depend on them for regulations. 63 recommendations. These are not just the color of the cars. These are fatigue. They are shunting, which is worker protection. They are cameras facing inward and outward. These are the guts of safety protection. The nuts, literally, the nuts and bolts of safety protection. And the reason they haven't been implemented and enforced is very simply that the FRA is breaking the law. It is failing to comply with deadlines that are in our statutes, and the reason is that they are much too deferential and respectful to the industry that they're supposed to regulate. Now, should they be collegial on occasion? Maybe. But there are times when they need to be confrontational, not collegial. And they need to tell the railroad industry that safety has to come first. And I believe that the railroad owners, by and large, simply want a level playing field. They want everybody to obey the same rules. And that's why the FRA has to do its job.
Senator Murphy, you have any? And I would like to thank you for those comments. I would like to add to the question about safety is that in the course of our investigations, if we see any reason to think that continued operation is not safe, we make immediate recommendations to that effect, as we have several times in this instance. Yes, please. The question is, how significant is it to us that the positive train control technology would have prevented the accident even if the engineer had fallen asleep? The answer is very significant, and that's why we've been pushing for positive train control for decades, because we know that this is a system operated by humans. Humans make mistakes. Positive train control is the backup for those human mistakes that will inevitably happen in a system as complex as this. So it would make a very big difference. Yes, please.
Just repeat the question.
The question is, what kind of communications have we had with the administrator of the Federal Railroad Administration? We've had extensive communications both in writing and face-to-face, back and forth on many of these issues, trying to get them to move, because as we indicated, the problem here that we've seen is not just Metro-North Railroad. The problem here is the regulatory environment in which they operate, and that's what the Federal Railroad Administration creates. Yes, please. The question is, how receptive has he been to those? The proof is in the pudding. We've got too many recommendations that have been out for too long without adequate response. Yes, please. The question is, why is it the employer's responsibility to test for sleep apnea? Sleep apnea is a sleep disorder that is often undiagnosed because until recently, you never heard the term sleep apnea. What that meant is that if I slept from 10 to 6 and I'm saying that's 8 hours, I should be well rested, but yet I'm sleepy the next morning, but I don't know why, and my doctor doesn't know either, then I go to my doctor and we don't even have the conversation about I'm fatigued and the doctor doesn't ask me. So more often than not, it goes undetected. When that happens, the people are in much greater risk of falling asleep and in the daytime or whenever, because they haven't had adequate, fully restorative, restful sleep and didn't know it. And that's why it's a huge and an emerging problem for us. And in addition to that, it's hugely associated with body mass index, and Americans are getting fatter. And as that happens, we're seeing increasing incidents of obstructive sleep apnea that's causing people to fall asleep without knowing why, and that's a huge safety problem for transportation. Yes, please.
Well, it would be admitting defeat to say that if we had high-speed rail, we couldn't have safety. We have to have both. High-speed rail is a great thing for our future. We need it. But until people are convinced that we can have safety on trains that travel at normal speed, it is going to be more difficult to convince people to go for high-speed rail. But we are making, what happened at Metro North is a wake-up call that has been sent from one end of America to the other. I believe the entire railroad system in this country will be safer as a result of these recommendations and as a result of the push that we'll be making in Congress to get the FRA to implement a lot of the recommendations. And so you can have both, and we have to have both.
Let me
Yes, go
answer
ahead.
that. If I can just, that is a profoundly important question, and there's a simple answer: positive train control. You can't have the technology of high-speed trains without the technology of positive train control. In many ways, I'm going to drive back to Connecticut with more technology in my car than trains do right now in controlling their speed and assuring safety. Positive train control is going to be essential. The investment has to be made. Senator Murphy's absolutely right. The Congress bears a responsibility here for standing up to that industry as well, which is going to be pushing for a delay in the 2015 deadline. Positive train control is essential to high-speed rail.
And let me just one last very simple comment on that. There is no correlation between how fast a train is and how safe it is. Metro North is one of the slowest trains in the world, and it was one of the least safe trains for a 2-year period of time. So when you're making investments in new high-speed rail, it allows you to make investments in safety as well. There's no correlation between how fast a train is going and its potential danger to commuters.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Let me say a word on that and then turn it over to the senators. Our experience has been, the first thing we always hear is this safety is too expensive. Our experience has been that safety well done improves productivity, improves reliability, improves on-time performance, and safety well done is a total win-win. So that's our experience based on our investigative experience.
In answer to your question, Andrew, you can have both. You can have on-time performance and safety. What happened at Metro North is they made a fatal choice. They chose on-time control and neglected safety. Does it cost a few more dollars? Yes. But lots of times when trains are delayed, it's because safety protocols haven't been followed and trains are stuck, trains stop, and everything is backed up. We have to have both. We can have both. There is no question about it, both safety and on time.
Yes, please. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you. Okay, the question is, what incentives did Metro North have to prioritize on-time performance over safety? I can't speak to what their incentives were in the past. What I can speak to is what we found in our accident investigations and how this report has changed that incentive so that now on-time performance is not first on their list, but safety is first on their list. And we're very pleased to see the progress that they have made in that regard. Senators, you have?
Yeah, well, the only thing I'd say is when a train's not on time, they hear about it immediately. When safety standards lag, nothing happens, nothing happens, nothing happens, and then huge tragedy happens. And so what we have to do, and that's why it's a good thing that Metro North and the MTA have put in somebody who's in charge of safety at the highest level. Safety have to be on their minds every day, whether there's an accident that day or not.
Yes, please. The question is, are there any sanctions or penalties when our recommendations are not complied with? The answer is no. We make recommendations, and that's what they are, is recommendations. We are not a regulator. We can't require anything, but here's the ultimate sanction. The ultimate sanction is if we make a recommendation and they don't do what we ask, and then there's a crash because they didn't do, then they are hanging out to dry before a jury. That's why we were very pleased to see that Metro North has voluntarily started screening for sleep apnea, even though we have not yet managed to get the FRA to do it nationally.
In our
Any further?
legislation, we increase the penalties.
And I would just say one of the reasons for our legislation is to require FRA to do its job and to impose penalties on them so as to hold them accountable. I can't emphasize how important that recommendation is. We have essentially a lawless agency, a rogue agency that's failing to follow the law. Statutory deadlines, I'm repeating it, I apologize. Statutory deadlines have been missed, and statutory requirements have been ignored. So this is a fundamental issue that requires legislative action. And let me come back, safety and on-time performance. The idea that somehow they are in conflict is a myth and misconception. In fact, they go together. A train can't be on time when it's unsafe. In most instances, safety promotes on-time performance. And they really have to be seen as complementary, not conflicting.
Last question. Go ahead.
Let me
Chris.
just a railroad has to be responsible and accountable to two entities, its regulator and its customers. Its regulator has been out to lunch over the past several years, but its customers will speak with a loud voice. The customers want on-time performance, but they want to be safe as well. And so what you risk is a downward spiral of safety, that as you have more and more accidents, you have less and less people riding the rail, providing less revenue in order to invest in safety. And so absent FRA adopting these recommendations, if safety doesn't improve, then their own customers will start voting with their feet and walk away from the railroad. So you talk about what the incentive structure is. We have an impression that commuters only want on-time performance. They don't. They want safety as well. For a long time, they took it for granted because Metro-North, up until this string of accidents, was one of, if not the safest railroad in the country. They took it for granted. But the incentive structure is aligned properly in that consumers will stop using the rail line if they don't see an improvement, which is why Metro-North has done the right thing and very quickly adopted these recommendations. Yes, they're protecting themselves from potential liability, but they're also protecting themselves from consumer flight if they don't get this right.
Last question for Chairman Hart. You had
Yes,
one already.
thank you for the question.
Who
We'll
didn't
take one
have
more, then we'll call it to a close. Yes,
didn't.
please. I don't think you've asked one yet. Please.
Okay, I'll answer.
And just my first impression, the question is what, if any, what, if any, sharing are we seeing of lessons learned from one of the railroads to the others? Historically, we didn't see enough of that sharing. Currently, we are seeing an increasing amount of that sharing, and that's encouraged, and that, again, is encouraged by our recommendation. Senator.
Let me just answer that. The tragedies on Metro-North have made the LIRR safer because the MTA, which oversees both railroads, has installed a regime of greater safety. So I can tell LIRR commuters that you are safer today than you were a year ago. We still are pushing for more and more and more safety, but the LIRR is safer today because some of the changes have been made throughout the MTA system.
And I might just point out on a national level, the nation is watching what's happening at MTA. There are lessons to be learned here. Will they be learned? The nation's railroads are watching. And what kind of sanctions will be applied if those lessons are not learned? I wrote to Chairman Szabo last week and asked for answers within 30 days. Last week I wrote to him and asked that he explain why these recommendations on worker safety particularly have not been adopted. So we'll see, and the nation's railroads are going to be watching not only what MTA does, but what the FRA does.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for your questions. This brings the press conference to a close. Thank you very much.